going on, guys? This is Nick at stridewise.com, and today I've got a rare three-way boot comparison: Redwing versus Chippewa versus Thorogood. So I've received a ton of requests from you guys to compare these three companies, and I think the reason for that is, they're all very beloved American brands, and they all sell these boots for under $300. Well, actually, the Iron Rangers are kind of hard to find for under $300, but I know a lot of people that do. But I did have a lot of difficulty deciding which of these companies' products to review, because after all, Redwing does make mock toes that are kind of similar to Thorogood's very famous mock toe boots, and then Thorogood makes these cap toe boots that are kind of similar to Redwing's very famous Iron Ranger. So at the end of the day though, I decided to go with each company's most popular boot so you can have an idea of what to expect if you go after each company's most famous product. So let's get started with the Redwing Iron Ranger. So the Redwing Iron Ranger is the most famous of these three boots, I would say, and this is the amber harness, which is the most popular leather for this model. Though I do need to say that I was conditioning these with Obernaufs for a couple of years before I realized I probably should have used Venetian shoe cream or mink oil. So this leather has darkened quite a bit. Yours might look like this. But in any case, I'm quite happy with the way this turned out. It's fine, it's just a bit darker. Now this model here, it is inspired by what the miners used to wear inside Minnesota's Iron Range. This is a Minnesota company. Although I should say that today this is part of Redwing's more fashion-focused heritage line. It's best known for this toe cap here, which is justifiably called bulbous by a lot of people. I can always count on someone to call them clown shoes. Nonetheless, it's a really popular boot. Everyone really likes the Iron Ranger. This leather is oil tanned leather, and it comes from Redwing's own tannery, which is kind of cool. And then finally, the sole, this is nitrile cork. I got this before Redwing changed all their soles, but as of summer 2018, all the soles of these boots have a Vibram sole instead of the nitrile cork. So your model might be a little bit different. Now, as for the Chippewa boot, this is the Chippewa service boot. It's a super popular boot. It's got a really sort of classic minimalist service boot design. There's no fancy toe cap like Redwing or anything like that. It's really got this good old-fashioned American work boot type aesthetic. The leather here is crazy horse leather, which I'm going to talk about in the next section, but this is one of the most popular types of leather for this boot. It comes out quite a bit golder than I was expecting from the pictures online, but I still really like this color, even though it does have some cons that I'm going to discuss. It's also got a 360-degree Goodyear welt, unlike Redwing, which has a 270-degree Goodyear welt. And finally, the sole. This is Vibram, so this is a little bit more similar to the material that Redwing soles are currently made of. The pattern's a bit different. Nonetheless, this is Vibram. It's a super famous rubber from an Italian company. It's got really good traction, although the shock absorption is not so great. Finally, the Thorogood Moktar, a super popular boot from Thorogood. Obviously, a big difference here is that it has a mock toe style. There's a lot more going on here as well. It's a lot more busy aesthetically, like there's stitching all over the place, all across the side. It's got a little American flag there as well. You got the Thorogood branding on the side too. The leather is oil tanned leather, so it's got a little bit more in common with Redwing's leather than Chippewa's. And the undersole here, it is actually a polyurethane made by Thorogood themselves, and it's really worth emphasizing here that this is really more of a work boot than these other two boots. Like, work boot is sort of an aesthetic or an idea that a lot of people like with their boots. They'll get boots that people used to wear in workplaces, but nowadays, they've been replaced by some more high-tech work boots. Thorogood, on the other hand, it retains this sort of old-timey aesthetic while actually being used by a lot of people who need them, like linemen and electricians and so on. The sole can withstand about 18,000 volts, for instance. So you could consider this a bit more functional than the other boots, at least in that regard. But let's talk a little bit more about these leathers. So as the Iron Ranger, this is the oil tanned leather, and again, as I mentioned, I did darken it quite a bit using Obernaufs instead. It's still aged pretty well, I'm okay with it, but yeah, yours will probably be a bit lighter than this if you do use the mink oil that they recommend. But anyway, I'm a big fan of oil tanned leather. One thing that's interesting, unlike these other companies, Redwing has their own tannery. It's called SB Foot Tanning Co. It's pretty highly regarded. And oil tanned leather is really one of my favorite leathers. Now, it doesn't really have the sort of depth of color as you might get with like a combination vegetable chrome tan like Chrome XL, which is a very famous leather. So it's not quite as fancy looking, but on the other hand, it is tougher in my opinion. It retains more moisture. It doesn't need conditioning quite as often. And it's a little bit more plain to look at. But by and large, oil tan leather, I would consider it tougher. And of the three, honestly, this is my favorite leather of them all. So for Chippewa, I got this leather that a lot of people really like from this company, which is called Crazy Horse Leather. They're not the only ones that have it, but they are well known for their Crazy Horse Leather. It's called that because it used to be used on horse saddles, and it still is in some places, but this doesn't come from a horse. This is a full grain, slightly corrected steer leather, and it's made by applying a kind of wax to the leather, which strengthens the fibers in a way that means that the color changes slightly when you rub your hand over it. It can always be like changed back if you want to, but this results in a very interesting leather that has a really sort of rustic, old-fashioned feel to it. It's not remotely formal. You can't really dress it up very much, but the upside is that one with like some old jeans or whatever, if you go out to a farm or just go out into the woods, it really looks very, very cool in informal settings. So I'm a really big fan of it if you want something more traditional looking. They also have this boot available in other leathers, of course. There's one called Tan Renegade, which is a bit more formal looking, if that's what you're going for with this boot. Now, as for Thorogood, this is also oil tanned leather, kind of like Redwing's. Oil tanned leather is usually vegetable tanned leather, and then it goes through some additional processes which involve like putting marine oil with it, or sometimes it's castor oil, or sometimes it's fish oil, or sometimes it's pine oil. So there's a bunch of different ways you can make it. Thorogood couldn't actually tell me which tannery makes this, which is a bit surprising, but not really when you remember that Thorogood is a gigantic company and a lot of people don't really know this stuff. Nonetheless, I can tell that it is pretty different to Redwing's oil tanned leather. Number one, it's thinner. But also, these shoes are 2 years younger than my Iron Rangers, but they are nonetheless, they've creased a bit more, and it's also got quite a bit more loose grain on the outside, which doesn't really affect durability, but like aesthetically, it's ugly. No one likes loose grain leather on their boots. So of the 3 boots that I have tried, I gotta say, Iron Ranger does have my favorite type of leather just because it is more durable, it's thicker, and I think it also ages a bit better as well. So I'm going to quickly talk about this sole. The Redwing has a cork midsole and a leather insole and a steel shank. The outsole is nitrile cork. So this is a composite of rubber and cork. Again, now they have the Vibram sole, which I'm going to talk about when I discuss Chippewa here. But here are these more classic Iron Ranger soles. I will say this. This flatness means you do not get stuff stuck to the bottom of your shoe, which is like a pro, I think. A lot of my grippier shoes, I'll often track little pebbles and sticks into people's houses, which is a bit annoying. That doesn't happen with this shoe. This is more wear resistant than leather as well. I'm thinking about like the Wolverine 1000 Miles leather sole, which gets really scratched up and ugly really quickly. I've also compared this to the Wolverine if you want to check that out. It also looks more traditional from this side. It's not super soft. I will say it definitely has better grip than you would think to look at it. Much better than leather, again. But the grip isn't absolutely fantastic. It's still a little bit scary to wear on like compacted snow. So that is worth remembering in winter. So as for the Chippewa, this also has a cork midsole and a leather insole like the Iron Ranger. The outsole here is Vibram, which is a kind of rubber from Italy. Aesthetically, not quite as pretty as the other boots in my opinion, but man, the grip is really, really good with Vibram. That's like a big upside of this particular rubber. Both the Chippewa and the Redwings have steel shanks as well. So like that's for arch support and stability. It does make for a more stable shoe. A lot of people think a shank is the most important thing. But I gotta say, compared to Thorogood, neither the Redwing nor the Chippewa have the best arch support, really. But I gotta say, of the 3, the Chippewa, probably the worst arch support, and also the worst shock absorption as well. This is like, feels a lot like walking around on wood. So that is something that sort of reminded me that it is not the most expensive Goodyear welted boot out there. Finally, my biggest complaint with this sole though, is that the heel started to detach after just like a week of wear. So it's not all that durable, and that's definitely a big downside for this shoe. Now, Thorogood's sole is completely different. Like I mentioned, they used to have a Vibram sole. Today, it's their own polyurethane, which they have calculated as being 25% more long-lasting. Although there are some complaints out there that it's not quite as soft as Vibram. Like if you're in it all day, it might be a little bit harder on the knees or something. That's probably more relevant to older folks or people with joint pain. And not everyone says that, but it's worth pointing out. But there's a lot more to talk about here. After the polyurethane outsole, there's a rubber midsole and a fiberglass shank, which is partly why this is a lighter shoe. And the insole is Poron, which is a material used in sneaker brands and also in like Thursday boots and some more modern boots. And that's an air permeable material that provides a lot of cushioning. And there's also this removable inset to add even more shock absorption. Now, if you are comparing this boot to Redwing's Moktar, this has a crepe sole, a cork midsole, and no shank, so it's pretty different. But if you want to compare these 3 boot soles, the Thorogood is lighter and has better shock absorption. Redwing, I think, looks the most classic and traditional, whereas Chippewa probably has better grip, but the shock absorption wasn't quite as good. So, it depends what you're after. Now, when it comes to picking a size, this is pretty simple. Every one of these, I just size down a half size from my sneaker size. So on a Brannock device, I'm between an 11.5 and a 12. When a boot fits true to size, this is 11.5. All three of these were a size 11, so pretty simple. When it comes to the widths, Thorogood does the best job, I think. They have B and D and double E. Chippewa has D, E, and double E. And Redwing has D and double E. This can all change at any time. That's what it is right now. So Thorogood does a better job of catering to both narrow and wide widths, which could be good news for some folks. When it comes to actually wearing these boots, I will say, first of all, Thorogood and Chippewa did not have a break-in period. Redwing had a nightmarish break period. That first week was really no fun. I was losing chunks of my foot all over the place. Eventually it did wear in. It conformed to the shape of my foot, which is something that the other boots didn't really do as much. That's sort of the trade-off. Like, the boot will conform to your foot, but you have to sort of put up with the break-in period, which is kind of famously bad for Redwings. When it comes to the actual comfort of the shoes, I gotta say, I think Thorogood had the best shock absorption and the best arch support at the end of the day, which is a weird thing to say because it is the cheapest boot and it's supposed to be worse in many regards, but I gotta say, shock absorption and softness of the sole, Thorogood came out on top. It feels the most like a sneaker, especially because it's the most lightweight. Chippewa had the best grip, but the shock absorption sucked. Redwing, pretty decent compromise of all three, but yeah, Thorogood, if what you want is a boot that's as close to a sneaker as possible, this Moktar is the one that's gonna win out. Now, when it comes to the price, first of all, everyone always comes into the comments and says, that's not how much these boots cost. I got them for cheaper as factory seconds or an outlet store or on eBay or something like that. Like, yes, of course you can get products for cheaper, but I'm gonna tell you how much they actually cost from the supply themselves, like the actual price of the boots. The Redwing Iron Ranger, this was, you get between $300 and $320. Chippewa is between like $270 and $290, and the Thorogood is like between $170 and $190. So it's dramatically cheaper than the other boots. And if you're comparing the Moktar to Redwing's Moktar, it's still about $100 cheaper. So I gotta say the Thorogood, definitely the best deal of the three. All right, so which is the better boot? I mean, I picked these three brands because, well, first of all, you guys asked me to. It's also because a lot of people are looking for this kind of information online. They're all American-made boots, but they're very different boots, right? So let's start with the Redwing Iron Ranger. What are the pros and cons? Pros, this is my favorite leather of the three. It is the easiest to take care of. It ages very well. It doesn't get scratches. It's very thick. It's very durable. And in general, this boot like feels very solid. Like, the sole is like very durable as well. Nitrile cork is like a very durable type of sole. The construction is just like really solid as well. Compared to the three of these, there's a certain feeling a lot of people go for when they're walking around in boots. They want to feel like kind of like strong and like the boot is really indestructible and they want to have a bit of weight to it. I think the Iron Ranger definitely succeeds the most in those categories, if you know what I'm talking about. The cons with this boot, I mean, it does have it's the only boot with a 270-degree welt, so maybe it's not quite as water resistant. It's also the most expensive of all of them, like by quite a bit, so that's really worth pointing out. The arch support is so-so as well, and this is definitely the hardest to break in. It was not fun at all, so that's a big downside for this boot. The Chippewa boot, on the other hand, this has plenty of pros. I mean, it is reasonably priced, like a boot that's under $300 that has like a nice Goodyear welt. A lot of people consider that like a pretty good buy. It's also got this really nice, uncomplicated service boot aesthetic that a lot of people really like. Like, when you think of a pair of boots, this is usually like exactly what people think about, so it's gonna satisfy a lot of people. It also has the best grip, in my opinion. This is like really good grip. The downside to this boot, the shock absorption sucks. Even though the grip is really nice, it feels sort of like you're walking around on wood, so that's not a really good aspect of this boot. Another thing is that the leather aged really quickly. I mean, it's got these wrinkles all over the side. There's like loose grain, all this sort of stuff. So that aged like very quickly, like within like a week of getting it. And then finally, you know, the heel is freaking falling off there. Like, it's not a very durable boot, and if I keep on wearing this, like the sole is just, the heel is just gonna fall off. So yeah, I do have plenty of complaints with this pair of shoes. It wasn't my favorite. Thorogood, on the other hand, this pair of boots, it has the best shock absorption, it has the best arch support, it's the lightest, it feels the most like a pair of sneakers. It's also the cheapest by a mile. And also, this is going to be the most useful for people who actually need a pair of work boots, like to walk around in a factory or something like that. This is something that you actually are likely to see in work boot type situations. The downsides, I mean, the leather is not absolutely fantastic. It wrinkled relatively quickly. It got some loose grain there as well. I can't pretend to be disappointed by that for the price, but nonetheless, if you can spend more, if you want leather that looks prettier, that might, you know, put you off from buying this pair of boots. Another thing I wanted to mention, it's very kind of showy. There's like a lot of stitching all over the place. They got this flag on the side. It's not like a subtle boot, if that makes sense. A lot of people, they want something that's kind of you know, sort of like subtle and dressy that they can wear around. And that's another thing that I wanted to mention. This is not versatile. Of these three boots here, I don't think this is particularly versatile. It does go very well with a t-shirt, which is a rare feat for a boot. Like, it's a very informal boot. But it's pretty hard to dress up, you know? So of the three of these boots, I gotta say they all have their pros and cons, and you're gonna have your own decision. For me, I just find myself reaching for the Iron Ranger more often. It is the most versatile of the three, in my opinion. It's not too hard to dress up or dress down. And also the leather, I think, is my favorite kind of leather. It's very durable, it ages well, and it just like feels really good on my feet. But that's just my opinion. You might have a completely different opinion. Let me know in the comments below. All right, those are my thoughts on Redwing versus Chippewa versus Thorogood. My opinion is completely subjective, but Redwing was my favorite, personally speaking. I'm looking forward to hearing which one is your favorite. The full written review with a bunch of pictures and more analysis is on my website, stridewise.com, and make sure you subscribe because I have a whole lot more boot reviews and comparisons coming up.